Hello everybody, Ian Bremmer here. I am live from Central Park. It's about 55 degrees in New York, going to hit 62 today before we get like 10 inches of snow tomorrow. No, I'm not doing your weather, I just find it magnificent. I kind of like walking around when I can in between meetings. New York is fantastic that way. It's going to be such a walkable city. But really, of course, I'm here to talk more about the world, and lots going on of interest right now. Today's news mostly about Europe, the fact that in the United Kingdom you're actually getting some movement on the Brexit. That was pretty easy for Theresa May at the end of the day to line up parliamentarians to support something that, like May herself, did not actually get on board until very late. May, of course, people forget that she was against Brexit before. Now she, of course, has to lead the charge to a hard Brexit on the judiciary, on immigration, on the common market. But so too, I mean, even though the majority of parliamentarians in the UK would actually prefer not to have a Brexit, that's their personal inclination, ideology, nobody wants to stand up right now against the will of the people. And so when you've just had that referendum, and so as a consequence, she's in a pretty strong position to push ahead and get this vote through Parliament, which I think happens pretty easily through the House of Lords, back final reading, and you're able to actually trigger Article 50 and start the countdown on the Brexit clock by the end of March. Now, the UK has not taken significant pain so far. What's going to be really interesting is as we get closer to the deadline, and on the one hand, people understand that the politics are going to be incredibly fractious, and you could end up having this breakdown and the UK end up just in WTO land and without a deal. I think that's actually quite a possible outcome. But it's also quite a possible outcome that the EU will not look like it presently looks in a couple of years' time, depending on the status of the Greek crisis and the response to that, depending on where the Italian government goes, depending on the outcome of the French elections coming up most quickly, and even the German elections where Merkel, I still think, will win, but is going to look a lot weaker than she has before. So for all of those reasons, I think that the UK Brexit referendum, which on its face is a serious problem for the UK economy, but if the Europeans are actually falling apart, then why is that such a big deal? I think that raises an interesting analogy with the United States, which is that, America first as a concept, as someone like myself who really believes in the importance of multilateral institutions that the U.S. actually created after World War II, the importance of those institutions to keep us safe, to try to make the world more sustainable, to try to help make globalization work for people that otherwise were reduced to absolute poverty in different corners of the world. Like, I actually do think those things are important. And yet, if you believe, like many of the Brits did, that Europe was just not fit for purpose and was going to fall apart anyway, so might as well leave, if you believe that that's going to happen to the world, if you believe that global jihad is a fight that we're not winning, and that the Middle East is going to truly collapse, if you believe, as Steve Bannon does, the chief strategist for Trump, that the United States and China are inexorably on a path towards direct conflict, the Thucydides trap, as many have spoken about historically, then why wouldn't you do an Amexit early? Why wouldn't you go America first now when the United States is still, by a large margin, the most powerful country in the world? Why wouldn't you want conflict with China now when they still have a much smaller economy, when they're in the middle of a leadership transition, when their military is vastly smaller than that of the United States, when the U.S. still has a significant cyber edge on them? Why wouldn't you force that conflict now as opposed to wait when you're in a supplicant position in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time? That is the actual view of many around Trump right now. Most importantly, the person who wrote the inauguration speech and has been driving the foreign policy strategy. Now, I think that there's sense in that. I don't like it. It wouldn't be my policy. But I think it is worth having an actual debate. And we should be taking them more seriously precisely because they're actually in power. They're very different from the foreign policy establishment, as opposed to on the domestic side, where the people that are advising Trump are very attuned to what the mainstream Republican establishment wants on corporate tax cuts, on domestic tax cuts, on the repeal/change of Obamacare, on infrastructure. I mean, you name it, they can work with. I mean, they've got billionaires, they've got bankers, they've got big industry, big business on their cabinet. Now, that works perfectly well with the Republicans in the House and Senate. But on the foreign policy side, the revolutionaries around Trump are the ones that have been driving policy. And the foreign policy establishment, both Republican and Democrat, really disagree with these folks strongly. Now, there are two issues here. One is that as a consequence of that, it's getting much harder to fill the midline positions in state and the National Security Council and even in the agencies, the intelligence agencies, with really capable people. So I think that they're just going to have less capacity to do policy well on the foreign policy side than they will, for example, in Treasury or in transportation or in commerce. And I think that's going to hurt Trump. It's going to hurt the United States. But secondarily, because they're at odds with the Republican establishment, you're going to see a lot of fractiousness around these issues. You'll see efforts by some in Senate to try to put up roadblocks, as you'll see on Russia. You will see the Americans on other foreign policy issues leaking like crazy, those that are in State Department, those that are in the CIA. I think that's going to be a serious problem too. So, I mean, going forward, it's not just whether you agree or disagree with the America First as an ideology, it's whether you believe that this team can execute on it. And let's keep in mind that Trump is by far the least capable, least experienced foreign policy president we've had. So, I mean, not only does he have a bunch of people around him that don't like the establishment, Obama had that, but Obama also really wanted to read. He really wanted expertise. He got all the briefings. Trump doesn't want to do any of that stuff. So it does make me, I am much more, I would say, neutral to optimistic about the near-term future of the U.S. economy and the ability of the Trump administration to deliver on that than I am on foreign policy, where I think everything we've seen for this last 2.5 weeks implies that we're heading for a much rockier path. And so whether you agree or not with America First, and I think there are a lot of sensible people that if you really had the debate and framed it the way I just did, would say, you know what, I could get behind that, but I just don't believe that they can make it on execution. I think they're set up to fail on execution, and I think that's going to hurt the United States. Let's see if I have any questions here, and I'll take a few. Oh, I got a whole bunch. What do you guys have to say? Dragana Nedin says, don't worry about the EU. They have decades of experience in crisis management and negotiations of all sorts. That's true. And European institutions are strong in that regard. The ECB, certainly staffed with some of the world's best technocrats in understanding how to deal with economic crises. But if you don't have the political will, I mean, it's structured so that you have to have all of these governments, not just the EU institutions in Brussels, but the governments themselves have to actually support a Greek bailout, a haircut, have to support a response to an Italian banking crisis, which is clearly coming. I mean, maybe not now, but, so many of, major Italian industry has already left. You look at Fiat, you look at Luxottica, and this is going to be the future for the banking and insurance industry too. I don't know what happens to the Italian economy, but I know that you're going to need response from European leaders, not just those capable European supranational institutions in Brussels. And those governments, many of them do not have that experience at all. I mean, look at Hungary, look at Poland, look at Slovakia, and maybe really soon look at France. And you're going to have institutions that, are going to be critical to the response that aren't going to do a very good job here. Ulis Garza, China is not in supplicant position. They're actually aggressive against USA lead positions. Are you sure about China's current status? Well, no, in the sense that China certainly has been more aggressive than the United States in negotiations. They're writing checks. The American economy is much bigger, but because China is both authoritarian and state capitalist, their central government is stronger, right? In terms of their ability to actually go around the world and say, here are the things we will bring you if you sign a deal with us. But let's be very clear. China's military is a small fraction of that of the United States. Their capability, their readiness is not half. It's more like maybe a fifth or an eighth or a tenth. And outside of Asia, they can't really project military power at all. The U.S. does that all over the world. The diplomatic capabilities are just not there. And you see the Chinese and all the big international meetings and, below the top levels, They talk amongst themselves. They don't know any other diplomats. They're not really trusted. They don't have the engagement. They don't experience soft power, same sort of thing. Now, what's interesting is, could the United States win a trade war against China? Xi Jinping says everybody loses. Where, if you look at Scaramucci and others publicly, but others privately in the Trump administration, they'll tell you the U.S. can win a trade war. This is a case where I think both sides are right. I mean, if the U.S. and China actually get into a trade war with each other, the Chinese are going to get destroyed, right? It's going to hurt their economy much more. American companies are, sort of much bigger, much more relevant in terms of value add. The U.S. economy is vastly more important. China does not have the pull to get companies to invest in them the way the United States does. And so an actual trade war between the two countries, China's going to get destroyed. But the Chinese government, as an authoritarian government, has much more ability to take pain than the United States, where Trump is going to get hit with private sector interests who can lobby and support globalism, which Trump hates, but it doesn't make it any less of a reality. So I think that's a very interesting debate, that even though America is vastly more powerful than China as a country, the Chinese government has much more capacity to leverage their power because it's authoritarian, because they don't have an opposition media, because they don't have opposition companies in the United States. We have a free market, so companies do whatever the hell they want. They don't want to be told what to do by the government. In fact, they want to pay to tell the government what to do. That weakens Washington. On balance, I hope we don't have a trade war. And I do think that the people in the Trump administration are kind of itching for a fight with China right now. That's a real worry for the global markets. But if we get into one, ultimately the Chinese are going to have to recognize that they don't have the same leverage that the United States does. So anyway, that's a little bit from me here from Central Park. Hope everyone has a lovely day today, especially if you're enjoying it in New York or on the Eastern Seaboard, the way that we are. And tomorrow, buckle up for a lot of snow and more Trump.